The moment Emma Sullivan stepped onto the polished wooden floor of Lane 1, she felt the weight of the afternoon rush settle on her shoulders. A late autumn breeze pressed against the glass doors, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and roasted coffee from the street. Emma adjusted the strings of her navy apron, her hands trembling just slightly, not from nerves, but from the endless hours on her feet. She had promised herself that today would be different. The first table she approached was buzzing with corporate chatter, a group of investors inspecting their menus like a boardroom meeting. At the corner, Thomas Carter, 42, CEO of Carter Innovations, sat alone, dark blue suit impeccably tailored, Patek Philippe glinting on his wrist. His gray eyes scanned the room with quiet authority, a faint crease of impatience between his brows. Emma froze for half a heartbeat. The air between them seemed to pulse. She knew of him, not personally, but his reputation preceded him, decisive, unflinching, known for reading people like open books. Thomas looked up from his menu. "Is this your section?" he asked, voice steady but with an edge that suggested impatience. Emma nodded politely. "Yes, sir. I'll take care of everything for you today." Her voice was calm, professional, yet it carried the subtle tension of someone aware of every eye in the room. A sudden movement drew her attention. A small girl, 5 years old with chestnut hair and a mischievous smile, darted past the hostess podium. Lily, Emma's daughter, clutched a well-worn coloring book to her chest, her little blue eyes scanning the room. Emma exhaled, crouching down to whisper instructions. "Stay close to me, sweetheart. Wait until I say it's okay." Lily nodded, fidgeting with the strings of her tiny jacket. Meanwhile, Thomas's gaze shifted. Something in the girl's expression, too familiar, too exact, caused a flicker across his face. Emma guided Lily behind a nearby column, shielding her from the crowd while keeping a careful eye on Thomas. She had spent years perfecting the balance between invisibility and attentiveness, and now it was being tested. Patrons continued their conversations, forks clinking against plates, soft jazz playing from overhead speakers, the routine masking the tension thickening near the corner table. Then it happened. Lily's small voice rang out across the polished floor. "Daddy." The single word shattered the rhythm of the restaurant. Heads turned. Phones lifted. Thomas froze, chair scraping softly against the floor. His eyes widened, a recognition so immediate it was almost painful. Emma's chest tightened. She stepped forward, gesturing subtly for Lily to stay calm, whispering, "Sweetheart, just a moment." She adjusted the tray in her hands with a deliberate motion, ensuring it remained steady. The CEO's hand twitched toward the edge of the table, eyes locked on the girl, lips parted. There was a silver locket around Lily's neck, glinting under the chandelier, identical to one Thomas's late daughter had worn. Emma's heart hammered, but her face remained composed. "Mr. Carter, may I serve your water now?" she asked, her voice deceptively casual. The room held its collective breath. Thomas's assistant nudged a small envelope across the table, inconspicuous yet loaded with significance. Emma caught the glimmer of papers inside. DNA results. Confirmation. Thomas's voice broke, just slightly. This can't be." Emma offered a slight, enigmatic smile, holding her composure with the quiet strength she had cultivated over years of careful vigilance. The room remained unaware of the deeper currents flowing beneath polite smiles and soft footsteps, but Emma felt them acutely. Lily shifted slightly in her stance, the innocent pressure of her hand on Emma's leg, and the faint rustle of paper inside the envelope suggested that nothing in this encounter was as it appeared. A secret, years in the making, was teetering on the edge of revelation, and Emma knew that the next words spoken could alter everything. Emma guided Lily behind the heavy oak column near the corner table, keeping her close as Thomas Carter's gaze remained fixed on the child. Lily's small hand squeezed Emma's fingers, her innocence contrasting sharply with the tension rippling across the room. Thomas leaned forward slightly, eyes scanning the locket, a flash of recognition and confusion battling on his face. Emma cleared her throat softly. "Mr. Carter, may I take your appetizer order while we settle things?" she asked, voice steady yet layered with authority. He blinked, as if suddenly aware that the waitress before him was far more than she appeared. Emma set down the tray of water with deliberate precision, the crystal glasses catching the light, casting tiny prisms across the linen tablecloth. "Lily," still fidgeting with her jacket strings, glanced up at Emma, uncertainty written across her features. A murmur spread among the patrons, the faint clatter of forks punctuating the charged atmosphere. Thomas's assistant, discreetly leaning from the side, passed a manila envelope across the table, the edges crinkled softly under his fingers. Emma's eyes flicked to it, noting the seal and the printed hospital logo. She maintained her posture, masking the rapid calculation running through her mind. Thomas cleared his throat, voice firmer this time. "Emma, do you realize what this could mean?" His hand hovered briefly above the envelope. Emma nodded subtly, crouching just enough to meet Lily's eye. "I understand, sir. We will proceed carefully," she said. The child's hand still clutched hers, small and tentative, drawing a silent line of trust. Thomas exhaled, tension easing fractionally, yet a shadow of doubt lingered across his brow. He reached for his phone, typing quickly, then gestured toward the envelope. "The preliminary results are here. I need to confirm everything before I speak." Emma nodded once, her lips pressed into a thin line, allowing her calm to anchor the moment. Outside, the wind rattled the restaurant windows, and a car horn echoed from the street, reminding them all that life moved relentlessly forward even in this suspended space. Emma adjusted a chair quietly, her movements precise and controlled, as if every action could influence the unfolding revelation. Lily looked up at her, eyes wide, and whispered, "Mommy, is he really my daddy?" Emma's hand tightened slightly over hers. "We will find out soon," she whispered back, glancing once at Thomas, whose hand rested tentatively on the envelope. The room seemed to hold its breath. Thomas's gaze flicked toward Emma again, and a faint crease of tension returned to his brow as he observed her measured reactions. "I need you to explain everything to me, step by step," he said, voice calm but commanding, curiosity sharpening into insistence. Emma inclined her head, acknowledging the unspoken power she had in guiding this moment. She reached for Lily's tiny coat, straightened it gently, and whispered, "Follow my lead, and stay close." Lily nodded obediently, her fingers curling into the hem of Emma's apron. Thomas shifted in his seat, one hand brushing against the manila envelope, his jaw tightening subtly. The locket caught the chandelier light again, a tiny pivot point of uncertainty. Emma's mind raced, balancing protocol, emotional stakes, and timing, her eyes darting to the child and back to Thomas. Every patron seemed unaware of the significance of what was about to unfold. Yet the collective tension was palpable. Emma's lips curved into a slight, almost imperceptible smile, a signal of control and anticipation. Thomas's fingers brushed the envelope again, hesitation and recognition blending. Emma inhaled slowly, a quiet calculation settling over her. She gestured toward Lily, motioning for her to step lightly forward. "Mr. Carter, may I suggest we discuss this privately, just for a moment?" she said, her voice smooth and firm. Thomas's gray eyes met hers, flickering with conflicted recognition. He inclined his head slightly, signaling compliance, but not complete surrender. Emma released a small breath she had been holding, her posture remaining poised, her thoughts racing through contingencies. Lily shifted again, a small shiver passing through her. Emma's hand rested lightly on her shoulder, grounding her, and for a heartbeat, the world outside the restaurant seemed to vanish. Thomas's eyes lingered on Emma's measured expression, uncertainty mingling with recognition. The subtle tension, the precise choreography of glances and gestures, suggested that the next exchange would alter everything. Emma's mind calculated the unfolding possibilities as she prepared to reveal only what was necessary, leaving the remainder suspended, a quiet question hanging in the air, and the envelope unopened, promising the next layer of truth to be unveiled. Emma led Lily quietly toward a small alcove by the side entrance, keeping her hand lightly on the child's shoulder. The envelope sat on Thomas Carter's table, its presence a silent accusation of what had been lost and what might be reclaimed. Thomas stood and approached slowly, every movement deliberate, his gray eyes narrowing as he observed Emma's careful guidance of Lily. "Emma, I need to know everything about how this happened," he said, voice controlled but edged with tension. Emma nodded, her blue eyes steady. "Thomas, there is a reason I kept her away from this world until now. It was for her safety." She gestured toward the child, whose fingers still curled lightly around her apron. Lily's eyes followed every movement, absorbing the adult tension with uncomprehending innocence. Thomas glanced at the locket again, lifting it to the light, and the metallic glint revealed a tiny engraving on the back, a date. Emma noticed his gaze. "That date is when I found her after the accident," she said softly. Thomas's hand brushed the envelope as if measuring its weight, then lowered it, uncertainty flickering across his features. "You mean you saved her?" he said quietly, the words almost a question. Emma nodded, crouching slightly to meet his gaze. "I raised her, made sure she would be safe, and kept her from anyone who might exploit her." A hush fell over the restaurant. The hum of conversation continued, but their small corner existed in its own suspended moment. Thomas's lips pressed together as he processed the revelation. "All this time, I thought," he paused, exhaling sharply. "I thought I had lost her forever." Emma's jaw tightened ever so slightly, a flash of pain visible before she masked it with calm. Lily shifted, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, and Thomas reached out instinctively. Emma's hand intercepted, steadying the child. "She is ready to know the truth, but it must be carefully managed," Emma said. Thomas took a measured step back, evaluating the care with which she held authority. "Emma, you have every right to set the pace. I understand that now." He gestured to the envelope. "May I see the results myself?" Emma considered, weighing the exposure of the evidence against the timing. "Thomas, you will know. But we must present this to her gently. She is 5 years old, and the revelations are significant." He nodded, glancing at Lily, whose eyes reflected the faint shimmer of the locket. Emma moved a hand slightly, guiding Lily closer to Thomas without letting go entirely. Thomas bent forward, the sunlight through the windows catching the edge of his silver watch. "She is my daughter," he said softly, more to himself than anyone else. Emma's lips curved into a controlled, almost imperceptible smile, her posture maintaining composure even as her heart raced. A waitress walked past with a tray of desserts, unnoticed by the trio, and the clinking of plates reminded them of the normal life continuing around their suspended moment. Thomas's eyes flicked between Lily and Emma, recognizing the depth of both restraint and intention. "We have to decide together how we move forward," Emma said, voice firm yet gentle. Thomas's hand hovered over the envelope once more, and he exhaled slowly, a mix of wonder, apprehension, and cautious hope. "I am ready to listen," he said, finally placing one hand lightly on the table. Lily shifted slightly, her small shoulders rising, and Emma's fingers tightened subtly over hers, conveying reassurance. Thomas's gaze lingered on the locket and the child, and a quiet understanding passed between the adults. This was only the beginning. Outside, the late autumn sun angled through the high windows, casting long, warm shadows across the restaurant floor, hinting at secrets still waiting to unfold, as Emma led the way to a private booth where the first conversation of many would begin, leaving the room charged with anticipation for what would come next. Emma led Thomas and Lily to a small, secluded booth at the back, positioning the child between them. She reached into her apron pocket and carefully placed a folded sheet of paper on the table. Thomas's eyes narrowed as he recognized the official letterhead of the Children's Hospital of Manhattan. "This is the incident report from the day of the accident," Emma said, her voice calm but firm. She unfolded the paper slowly, sliding it toward him. Lily leaned slightly forward, curiosity brimming in her blue eyes. Thomas's fingers brushed the edge of the report, tracing the printed words. Date, location, medical staff, and a clear notation that a child matching Lily's description had been found and placed under temporary care by a caregiver identified as Emma Sullivan. He looked up sharply, meeting Emma's gaze. "You took responsibility for her that day?" he asked, his voice low but intense. Emma nodded once, steady. "I could not allow her to be lost to the system. I kept her safe and raised her carefully until she was ready to know the truth." Thomas leaned back, the weight of comprehension settling on him. "All this time, I thought I was powerless, that I had failed her." Emma's eyes did not waver. "You were unaware, Thomas. Knowledge does not equal failure. Action does." Lily shifted, a small finger tracing the edge of her mother's hand. Thomas's gray eyes softened slightly as he observed the bond between them. He reached for the locket again, turning it in his hand and inspecting the engraving. The date matched exactly the incident report. "I cannot believe this," he muttered. "Every detail aligns. You have been honest every step of the way." Emma allowed a brief nod, recognizing the shift in authority. Until now, Thomas had held power and perception. Now, the concrete evidence, the report, the locket, the dates, placed Emma in control of the narrative and the timing of revelation. "We need to consider how and when she learns the rest," Emma said, glancing at Lily, who looked between the two adults with wide, absorbing eyes. Thomas exhaled, a mixture of awe and careful calculation in his expression. "I realize now that I cannot dictate this moment," he said quietly. "Your judgment guided her safely all these years." Emma's lips curved slightly, affirming the subtle authority she held without words. She gestured for him to read the full incident report. Thomas's hands moved deliberately, scanning the lines that documented Emma's precise interventions, her coordination with hospital staff, and her protective measures. The detailed notations of times, medical procedures, and her signatures offered undeniable proof. The balance of power had shifted. The CEO who commanded companies now acknowledged her control in this intimate, decisive instance. Lily adjusted her small backpack, a crumpled crayon falling from the side pocket, a mundane detail grounding the moment in ordinary life amid the revelation. Thomas looked up again, meeting Emma's gaze directly. "Everything matches. She is truly your daughter. Every record confirms it." Emma's voice was steady. "Yes. And now we decide together how to introduce her to the rest of the truth, without overwhelming her." Thomas nodded, his expression thoughtful, calculating, aware that the next step required careful precision. He lifted the envelope again, hesitated, then set it beside the report, signaling that he understood the unfolding dynamic. The evidence was clear, the facts undeniable, and yet the story remained incomplete. The question of who would speak first to Lily, and what she would be told, lingered like a taut thread in the quiet restaurant. Outside, the streetlights flickered on as the late afternoon waned, casting long shadows across the floor, a subtle reminder that the next revelation would not wait, and that the following conversation would determine how this family, fractured and hidden for years, would begin to reconcile. Thomas Carter leaned forward, sliding the incident report and locket across the table toward Emma, his hand lingering with an almost imperceptible tremor. "Emma, I need to see her today," he said, voice firm, each word weighted with authority and urgency. Emma's eyes flicked to Lily, who was coloring quietly, unaware of the magnitude of the conversation. The child's small fingers traced the edge of her crayon box, a mundane detail that anchored the tension in reality. Emma straightened, placing a gentle hand on Lily's shoulder. "She is not ready for full disclosure yet. We must move carefully." Thomas exhaled, sharply, leaning back, but not relinquishing control. "I understand caution, but I will not wait any longer. I am her father, and she deserves to see me." His steel-gray eyes locked on hers, a silent challenge threading through his words. Emma measured her response, her fingers tightening slightly over Lily's small hand. "Thomas, you have rights. I respect that, but rushing her could frighten her. Timing matters." He glanced at the envelope again, then at the restaurant windows where sunlight angled across the polished floorboards. "The evidence is clear, Emma. Every record, every note, every date aligns perfectly. I am convinced. We cannot delay further." Emma exhaled slowly, calculating options, aware that yielding control now meant ceding power over how the truth would reach the child. She reached for a napkin, smoothing the edge on the table in a deliberate, grounding motion. Lily looked up at both adults, sensing the shift, her blue eyes wide and curious. Thomas leaned in slightly, lowering his voice to a calm insistence. "I will sit with her for a few minutes. Just a short conversation. I need to connect before anything else happens." Emma's lips pressed together. This was the first real escalation. He was asserting immediate action based on concrete proof, not speculation. She nodded once, her posture steady, acknowledging his demand while maintaining subtle control over the moment. 5 minutes. Then we stepped back. "You follow my lead," she said firmly, her voice measured and unyielding. Thomas's gaze softened, recognizing her authority, but also understanding the stakes had shifted. He gestured toward Lily, who sat motionless, crayon poised midair. Emma guided the child gently, moving to place her on the small booth bench, and Thomas reached forward carefully, his hand hovering, ready to offer a reassuring touch. Lily's eyes darted between the two adults, sensing tension and importance. Thomas's voice broke slightly, a rare trace of vulnerability entering his controlled demeanor. Emma, I promise I will follow your guidance. I just need a chance to speak with her. Emma inclined her head slightly, signaling cautious approval. She adjusted Lily's coat, straightening the sleeves and smoothing the fabric, emphasizing order and calm. The clock above the side door ticked steadily, a mundane marker contrasting with the extraordinary stakes unfolding in the booth. Thomas glanced at it, then back at Emma, as if timing the moment and weighing each second. I am ready, he said finally, voice resolute. Emma's eyes softened, but her grip on reality and procedure remained firm. All right, but remember, this is just the first step. One step at a time, she replied. Lily shifted again, nudging slightly toward Thomas, the faint rustle of her backpack audible. The sunlight caught the locket on her small chest, glinting as if highlighting the pivotal moment. Thomas's hand hovered over it, and for the first time, Emma sensed the subtle recalibration of control, the balance of influence, authority, and trust now tangibly shifting. The tension tightened, the air heavy with anticipation, and the next words exchanged would set the stage for a conversation that could change everything. Yet Emma withheld full disclosure, holding the thread of the story taut, leaving the unfolding truth suspended just out of reach, a quiet promise of revelations waiting to unravel in the following moments. Emma led Lily to the edge of the booth, carefully positioning her between herself and Thomas Carter, her hand lightly resting on the child's small shoulder. Thomas leaned forward, glancing at the locket once more, his gray eyes reflecting curiosity and urgency. I want her to know everything, Emma. I cannot sit idle, he said, his voice firm but measured. Emma nodded, acknowledging his position while subtly asserting her own authority. She reached into her apron pocket and retrieved a small, folded note she had kept hidden, a handwritten letter from the day Lily had been found, signed by the hospital social worker confirming Emma's intervention and care. She slid it across the polished table, the envelope catching the sunlight. Thomas's hand hovered over it, then paused, reading the visible words, his expression flickering between surprise and understanding. So you orchestrated her safety all this time, he said quietly, realization dawning. Emma's blue eyes met his with calm precision. Yes, every decision, every action was deliberate. I knew the risks, and I chose the path that protected her first, she replied. Lily shifted slightly, sensing the significance without fully understanding, her small fingers curling around the edge of the table. Thomas exhaled slowly, glancing from the note to Emma's composed face. The power dynamic in the booth subtly shifted. Until now, he had held authority over the situation, guided by paternal instinct. Now, tangible proof and Emma's deliberate control forced him to reconsider the balance. I underestimated your foresight, Thomas admitted, leaning back, the weight of his words sinking into the space between them. Emma adjusted Lily's coat, smoothing the wrinkles, a simple gesture loaded with quiet command. There is more to reveal, she said, her tone calm, yet unyielding. Thomas's eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of impatience crossing his face, tempered by the understanding that he could not rush this process. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, each second a reminder that every decision now carried immense consequence. Emma glanced down at Lily, whose innocent gaze lifted to her mother, drawing subtle reassurance from Emma's poised presence. We will introduce truths in stages, Emma continued. I determine the pacing. You will respond, not dictate. Thomas's hand hovered near the locket again, a silent acknowledgement that he recognized her strategy. I see, he said, tone subdued but focused, a hint of reluctant respect threading through his words. Emma's lips curved slightly, almost imperceptibly, signaling awareness of the leverage she now held. The restaurant's ambient noise, the clatter of cutlery, low murmur of diners, soft hum of jazz, seemed distant, as if the booth contained a microcosm where control and revelation intertwined. Lily fidgeted with her backpack strap, a mundane detail grounding the moment in reality. Thomas followed her movement with a sharp, evaluating glance. Emma took a slow breath, a deliberate pause, and then motioned subtly toward the envelope with the social worker's note. "Read this carefully," she said. "It confirms what you suspected, but there are elements you will not yet see. The rest unfolds with care." Thomas's gray eyes locked on hers, curiosity, concern, and a flicker of caution converging. He inclined his head slightly, a silent pledge to abide by her terms for now. Emma's gaze softened, but her hand remained on Lily's shoulder, an unspoken signal of command and protection. The afternoon sun slanted across the table, illuminating the note and the locket in tandem, a visual marker of strategy and hidden strength. Thomas exhaled, recognizing that this encounter was no longer a simple revelation. It was a negotiation of timing, trust, and authority. Emma's subtle positioning and control over the moment suggested that the next steps would be carefully orchestrated, and the true extent of her planning remained undisclosed, leaving the unfolding narrative suspended and the next revelation poised to dramatically shift the balance in the following part. Emma carefully guided Lily to the small booth, positioning her to face Thomas Carter, while keeping a subtle hand on the child's shoulder. The sunlight streaming through the high windows caught the edges of the locket, casting tiny prisms across the table. Thomas leaned forward, tracing the engraved date with a fingertip, then glanced at the folded envelope Emma had placed earlier. "Emma, I need to understand your timeline," he said, his voice firm, controlled, yet tinged with urgency. Emma's blue eyes met his with deliberate calm. "The timeline is clear," she said. "I found her hours after the accident, ensured she was cared for, and made arrangements that protected her from exposure until she was ready." She tapped lightly on the envelope. "Every detail is documented here, including who was present and every decision made." Thomas exhaled slowly, acknowledging the meticulousness of her planning. He looked down at Lily, who was fidgeting with her small backpack, and then back to Emma. "You orchestrated all of this without my knowledge," he said, a mixture of realization and restrained frustration threading through his words. Emma inclined her head slightly. "Yes, and I maintained discretion to protect her until now. Timing is crucial, Thomas. Acting too soon could have caused harm." Thomas's gaze lingered on the envelope, a subtle acknowledgement that he recognized her control over the unfolding moment. Lily looked between the two adults, her small hands resting on the table edge, absorbing tension she did not fully understand. Emma reached for the locket and held it out slightly toward Thomas, emphasizing the concrete evidence of her intervention. "This locket and these documents are not just symbols," she said quietly. "They represent deliberate, responsible action. They shift the control of this situation until the child is prepared for the truth." Thomas's gray eyes softened slightly, respect and tentative acceptance blending as he leaned back, considering her words. "I see now that I cannot dictate the sequence. Your foresight has earned my cooperation," he admitted. Emma allowed a measured nod, her posture steady, signaling a subtle power shift. She now directed the pacing of the revelation. Lily adjusted in her seat, shifting a little closer to Emma, fingers brushing against the corner of the envelope. Thomas followed her movement, acknowledging that the child's comfort and Emma's judgment now guided the interaction. Emma placed a hand lightly on Lily's shoulder, anchoring her, and then glanced toward Thomas. "We will take the next steps together, but I will decide when she hears each part," she said firmly. Thomas exhaled and leaned back, hands resting on the table, eyes fixed on the locket and documents, recognizing the quiet authority Emma wielded with precision. The restaurant continued its routine around them, the soft clink of plates, muted conversations, the faint hum of jazz. But the booth held a microcosm where control, evidence, and strategy converged. Emma tilted the envelope slightly, ensuring Thomas could see every detail but not read ahead. "The child's understanding will unfold in stages," she continued. "I hold the sequence and the context. You will respond accordingly." Thomas's jaw tightened subtly, acknowledgement in his eyes. "I am learning to follow, not lead, for now," he said. The afternoon sunlight shifted, highlighting the locket and casting a reflective glow on the table, reinforcing the tangible proof Emma controlled. Lily's gaze lifted to Thomas, then back at her mother, sensing tension yet comforted by Emma's poised presence. Emma's lips curved into a controlled, almost imperceptible smile, a signal that the initial move in a carefully orchestrated plan had succeeded, but the next sequence of revelations, decisions, and dialogue remained deliberately in her hands. Thomas exhaled, placing one hand over the edge of the envelope without opening it, fully aware that the dynamic had shifted and that the next conversation would be crucial. The moment lingered, a taut balance between proof, authority, and anticipation, setting the stage for the next move that would irrevocably define how Lily learned the truth and how power would continue to realign between them, leaving a sharp, unspoken question of who would speak first and what the child would absorb in the following moments. Thomas Carter leaned back slightly, a spark of resolve brightening his gray eyes. He set the envelope flat on the polished table, opening it just enough to glance at the neatly typed pages inside. "Emma, this confirms everything," he said, his tone firmer than before, carrying the authority of certainty. He traced the lines detailing the hospital records, dates, and signatures, absorbing each precise notation. "I need to take the next step. I cannot wait any longer for formal introductions," he continued, a subtle intensity threading through his words. Emma's blue eyes remained calm, though she tightened her hold on Lily's small hand, fingers brushing lightly over the child's knuckles, a quiet reminder that she still controlled the pacing. Lily shifted, her small fingers twitching around the edge of the table, sensing the rising energy. Thomas stood and moved the chair slightly, positioning himself closer to the child with deliberate care, eyes never leaving Emma. "We need to create a comfortable moment for her. I will handle the first conversation," he said. Emma inclined her head subtly, allowing him to assume initiative while maintaining oversight. Her gaze lingered on the locket, catching the sunlight and throwing tiny reflections across the table, a visual reminder that evidence and strategy remained in her hands. Thomas picked up Lily's coloring book, opening to a page half filled with crayons, a tangible, everyday object linking the child to normalcy amid tension. "She loves to draw," he said softly, offering the book to her. Lily's eyes lit up, the slight movement revealing trust and curiosity. Emma's hand rested lightly on the child's shoulder, signaling both protection and guidance. Thomas exhaled, a quiet acknowledgement of the balance, shifting subtly toward shared influence. "I want to explain things gently, on her level," he said, glancing at Emma with a mixture of respect and anticipation. Emma nodded, keeping her lips tight, her expression controlled, the silent authority of timing and selective disclosure still firmly hers. Thomas began organizing the pages from the envelope in chronological order, deliberately demonstrating method and preparation, the first visible sign of his increasing confidence. He looked up, meeting Emma's steady gaze. "We can do this together, but I will speak first, to set the tone," he said, a calculated assertion of his newfound initiative. Emma allowed a faint smile, acknowledging his involvement while keeping the ultimate sequence in her hands. She lifted Lily slightly to sit properly in the chair, adjusting her jacket, small fingers curling into Emma's for reassurance. The afternoon light shifted, catching the edges of the hospital letterhead and the locket, underscoring the tangible proof that now guided their interactions. Thomas exhaled slowly, collecting his thoughts as he prepared to speak to Lily, his body language confident yet measured, aware that Emma still dictated the parameters. "Are you ready, Lily?" he asked gently, voice even, inviting but firm. The child looked from her mother to Thomas, a mixture of curiosity and apprehension on her face. Emma's fingers tightened slightly over hers, a subtle signal of control and comfort. The balance had begun to shift, the CEO taking a more active role, but Emma retained the true measure of authority, the orchestration of timing and revelation firmly in her grasp. The room held its quiet hum of diners and clinking plates, yet within the booth, every movement, glance, and gesture now carried weight. Thomas's voice softened as he gestured toward Lily, the coloring book in hand. "I want to start simply, with what she already knows," he said, eyes on Emma, seeking approval and guidance. Emma inclined her head subtly, a silent agreement that he could proceed, while reserving the full story for when the child was truly ready. The locket caught the light again, a pivot point between past and future, and Emma's subtle control over what Lily would hear next ensured that the next revelation would come precisely on her terms. leaving the moment tense with anticipation and the next shift in authority waiting to unfold. Emma let Thomas adjust Lily's chair and pick up a crayon without interruption, silently observing every movement. She retrieved a small notebook from her apron pocket and flipped it open, revealing neatly organized notes and subtle cues she had recorded over the past years. Dates, hospital names, moments when Thomas had unknowingly left traces, and hints of his reactions to previous revelations. She marked the current time and made a mental note of Lily's focus on the coloring book, aware that the child's attention span and comfort were key to controlling the next phase. Thomas leaned in, speaking softly. "Lily, would you like to show me your drawing?" His tone was inviting, precise, a balance of authority and encouragement. Lily looked up briefly, then returned to her illustration, colored pencils shifting across the page, unaware of the gravity of the situation. Emma's fingers tapped lightly on the edge of the table, signaling a pause, a subtle rhythm that reinforced her control over timing. She observed Thomas's posture, noting the slight tightening of his jaw, the subtle alignment of his hands over the coloring book, and the calculated angle of his lean, all evidence that he believed he had taken the lead. Emma tilted the locket slightly, catching the sunlight to illuminate the engraving, and let Thomas glance at it without comment, reinforcing the perception that he held knowledge while she retained the context. "She has a wonderful eye for detail," Thomas said, nodding toward the intricate shading on Lily's drawing. Emma inclined her head, replying smoothly, "Yes," and her attention is sharpened by careful guidance. Every step must be intentional. Thomas's expression flickered, a mixture of respect and curiosity, unaware that Emma had already aligned the next layer of revelation in her notes. Lily hummed softly, adding more color to the page, and Emma's hand brushed lightly over the corner of the coloring book, subtly adjusting the angle to ensure that both the locket and the note were in Thomas's peripheral vision. Thomas exhaled, leaning back, clearly confident in his proximity to the child and the unfolding moment. Emma let the confidence build, noting his reliance on her continued composure, and recorded a mental timestamp, knowing the exact sequence of his reactions. "I think she would like to tell me about the shapes she drew," Thomas said, leaning closer to Lily, attempting to engage her while maintaining a paternal authority. Emma nodded, her fingers still on the table edge, subtly guiding the flow without overt interference. Lily pointed to a section of her paper, explaining in simple, excited sentences, and Thomas responded, genuinely smiling, believing he was directing the interaction. Emma allowed this, but with each exchange she internally adjusted the timing and emphasis, ensuring that the child's trust remained aligned with her carefully structured plan. The penmanship of her notes was precise, documenting the movements, glances, and small verbal cues, forming a map of control for the forthcoming disclosures. Sunlight shifted again across the polished table, highlighting the envelope and locket, a silent signal that tangible evidence remained hers to deploy. Thomas's hands hovered over the edge of the coloring book, eyes scanning Lily's expressions, unaware of the full orchestration. Emma's mind cataloged every micro-expression, every pause in speech, every shift in posture, and she let a small, controlled smile appear, signaling internal readiness to pivot. She whispered gently to Lily, guiding the child to offer a small colored shape to Thomas, reinforcing her subtle command of the interaction. Thomas accepted it with an approving nod, feeling a sense of progress and influence. Yet Emma had orchestrated the exact moment and the perception of participation. The delicate balance between apparent paternal authority and Emma's true control now tipped carefully toward the revelations she would reveal next, leaving the booth poised for the next decisive move that would alter the understanding of parentage and timing, and the next step held the promise of uncovering truths that Thomas had not anticipated, setting the stage for the confrontation and disclosure that would unfold in the following part. Emma observed Thomas leaning closer to Lily, his hand hovering just above the child's small shoulder, as if poised to bridge the distance between intent and action. The envelope with the hospital documentation rested between them, partially unfolded, catching the afternoon sunlight, the paper crisp and tangible, each detail reinforcing Emma's careful orchestration. Thomas's gray eyes flicked from Lily to the envelope and back, a subtle shift in confidence evident as he said, "I want to start by reading this to her myself. I need her to hear from me first." Emma's fingers traced the edge of the table lightly, signaling the passage of time and her deliberate measurement of the moment. "You may introduce the content," she said, her voice calm yet precise, "but you will follow the order and timing I have set." She leaned in slightly, adjusting Lily's small hand over the coloring book to ensure the child remained anchored to her guidance. Lily's eyes lifted toward Thomas, her curiosity tentative, and she clutched the edge of her crayon box, a tangible connection to everyday safety amid complex truths. Thomas exhaled and began reading aloud, carefully enunciating each word of the incident report. Emma watched every micro-expression, noting the slight widening of his eyes as he realized the extent of her past decisions and the deliberate protective measures she had implemented. "I did not know," Thomas admitted, voice low, acknowledging the meticulous planning and unseen control Emma had maintained. Emma's lips curved slightly, subtle but commanding, as she let him proceed while retaining full authority over context and timing. She guided Lily's gaze toward the document when necessary, the locket reflecting the sunlight at intervals, linking visual confirmation to the verbal narrative. Thomas paused, adjusting the sequence of the papers, and spoke softly. She was kept safe every step of the way. Emma inclined her head, affirming the truth while allowing him to take perceived initiative. The balance had begun to shift subtly, yet Emma's careful structuring ensured that the reveal's pace and impact remained under her control. Lily's small hand brushed against the table edge, fingers curling lightly around Emma's thumb, anchoring her attention. Thomas looked up, recognizing the duality of authority. He commanded paternal presence, but Emma controlled comprehension and delivery. "I want to explain this gently," he said, glancing at Emma for approval. Emma nodded once, maintaining a calm exterior while mentally preparing the next set of revelations. "You may proceed, but remember this is only the first layer," she reminded, her voice even and measured. Thomas's posture shifted, leaning slightly forward, more engaged, aware of Emma's quiet command, yet emboldened by the concrete evidence before him. Emma adjusted Lily's coat gently, her fingers lingering to ensure both warmth and subtle guidance, reinforcing the child's comfort while controlling perception. Thomas exhaled and glanced at the locket, a tangible anchor of the facts and proof that now guided their interaction. The restaurant continued its ambient rhythm, the soft clink of cutlery and murmur of conversation a backdrop to this delicate, high-stakes exchange. Emma's hand rested lightly on the envelope, signaling her continued oversight, her subtle grip a reminder that full disclosure would follow her timing. Thomas's voice softened as he continued. "She needs to understand, step by step." Emma allowed the words to hang, the next phase of revelation suspended, giving the child agency while retaining the strategic advantage. The afternoon light shifted, illuminating the papers and the locket once more, and Emma's controlled patience signaled that the next move would expand the truths revealed, setting up the confrontation and crucial disclosures poised for the following part. Emma finally unfolded the entire envelope, revealing the detailed hospital report, original incident logs, and a notarized statement from the attending social worker confirming every intervention she had taken for Lily. Thomas leaned in, eyes widening as he read each line. Exact times, locations, the medical staff involved, and Emma's signatures verifying she had found the child, secured emergency care, and coordinated placement with the system without alerting anyone else. This is irrefutable," Thomas said, voice low, a mixture of awe and cautious respect. He ran a hand over the table, glancing between Lily, who looked up with innocent curiosity, and Emma, whose calm composure masked years of strategic planning. Emma allowed a faint, controlled smile, her hand brushing over Lily's shoulder to anchor the child, while the evidence on the table solidified her authority. Every action, every decision, was documented and verified. "The chain of responsibility is complete," she said firmly. Thomas exhaled, tilting his head, the shift in power palpable as he recognized that Emma had not only controlled timing and context, but also held tangible proof that left no room for dispute. The locket caught the sunlight again, glinting over the edge of the table, a physical symbol of lineage and protection tied directly to the verified records. Thomas straightened slightly, leaning back to absorb the impact, acknowledging for the first time that Emma dictated the flow of information and influence in this moment. I cannot undo what you have controlled, nor could I have anticipated every move, he admitted quietly, a hint of reverence threading through his words. Emma inclined her head subtly, letting him feel he had contributed while keeping the orchestration firmly in her hands. She glanced at Lily, whose small fingers toyed with the corner of the coloring book, a mundane but grounding detail linking the child to everyday normalcy. You see, the proof is here. Everything is verifiable. The child's welfare and the narrative of her past are intact because of measured choices, and the next steps are ours to direct, Emma said, voice calm yet commanding. Thomas nodded slowly, recognition dawning that he was now guided by the combination of facts and Emma's strategy rather than his initial instinctual urgency. He exhaled, placing the locket carefully beside the documents, letting the sunlight catch the engraving once more. Lily shifted slightly, her blue eyes flicking between both adults, sensing significance. Emma leaned back, her fingers tapping lightly on the edge of the envelope, a silent reminder that she still determined the pace of revelation. Thomas's gaze followed the subtle movement, and he realized that even with his authority and intent, he was now operating within the framework Emma had meticulously established. I understand, he said finally, voice firm but measured. We will proceed according to your guidance. Emma allowed the statement to hang, signaling temporary concession while maintaining control. The room continued its usual rhythm of distant conversations and clinking plates, yet the booth contained the undeniable fact. The evidence now in front of them left no doubt, and the balance of power had shifted decisively. Emma's calm hand on Lily's shoulder reinforced her authority, the combination of proof and timing making her influence absolute in this moment. The documents, the locket, and the notarized verification created a tangible, inescapable chain of truth, leaving Thomas to recognize that any misstep would be on his terms only within the structure she permitted. The afternoon sun glinted off the polished tabletop, illuminating every page. A metallic detail, a visual signal of control and clarity. Emma's gaze lingered on Thomas, and then on Lily, knowing the next conversation would push boundaries and reveal even deeper truths, setting the stage for a pivotal confrontation and resolution that would irrevocably shift understanding in the following part. Emma held the envelope tightly, the paper crinkling softly under her fingers as she watched Thomas lean closer to Lily, his expression calm yet eager. She drew a slow, shuddering breath, and her mind flashed back to the night she had left her own father sitting alone in the hospital hallway, his eyes hollow and voice broken as she walked away, thinking she was protecting herself. She remembered the echo of his sigh, the way the fluorescent lights flickered above, and how her silence had cut deeper than words ever could. A tight ache pressed in her chest as a tear escaped and ran down her cheek, the first one in years. Emma blinked it away and exhaled sharply, straightening her posture and adjusting Lily's tiny hand over the coloring book, guiding the child gently toward Thomas. I need to do this right, she whispered to herself. She picked up her phone with hands that trembled slightly, glancing at the screen one more time to ensure the message she was about to send was clear and deliberate. Thomas noticed the subtle shift, his eyes meeting hers, a mixture of curiosity and patience threading through his demeanor. Emma's thumb hovered over the send button. Every second felt heavy, each heartbeat echoing in the quiet of the restaurant. The sunlight glinted off the locket around Lily's neck, and for a moment, the child's innocent eyes reflected back the weight of the past and the fragile hope of reconciliation. Emma exhaled again, steadying her hand. She typed a simple message, words chosen to convey acknowledgement and apology, the tremor in her fingers betraying the gravity of the moment. I am sorry for everything you lost because of me. I want to make this right. She hesitated, scanning Lily's small, absorbed face, then pressed send. Her lips quivered, a second tear forming as she swallowed hard, watching the 3 blue check marks appear. Thomas inclined his head, sensing the sincerity in the slight tremor of her movements and the careful selection of her words. Emma, he said softly, that was brave. She nodded, her voice a whisper almost swallowed by the ambient clink of dishes and quiet chatter. "It is time," she murmured, reaching over to place her hand lightly on Lily's shoulder, offering reassurance to the child and herself. The locket shimmered again in the sunlight, glinting across the polished table, a symbol of what had been protected and what was now being restored. Thomas exhaled, a subtle smile forming, the tension between urgency and trust shifting. Emma allowed the vulnerability to surface just enough to show her sincerity, yet her control of timing and perception remained intact. She guided Lily's hand slightly, letting the child rest it near Thomas's, a silent cue of connection and cautious introduction. The restaurant's low murmur continued, inconsequential to the drama unfolding in the booth. Emma watched the effect of her small, deliberate actions, Thomas leaning in slightly, a softening in his posture, recognition of the deliberate orchestration, the tangible evidence of her careful planning juxtaposed with the emotional risk she now embraced. The tears in her eyes were proof of human error and accountability, the phone message a bridge toward reconciliation, and the subtle positioning of Lily between them reinforced Emma's authority over both context and pacing. She inhaled, feeling the weight of years and the tremor of vulnerability, yet the first concrete steps toward repair had been taken. The glint of the locket and the message on the phone together formed a nexus of past, present, and potential future. Thomas's gaze lingered on both Emma and Lily, aware that the balance had shifted again, that trust was being cautiously extended, and that the next move, whether words, gestures, or acknowledgement, would set the stage for the final, irrevocable reconciliation. A soft chime from the restaurant door announced a new arrival, distant yet distinct, and Emma's eyes flicked toward it briefly, knowing that whatever awaited next would collide with the fragile, tender moment she had so carefully constructed, leaving the outcome suspended and the next revelation poised for the following part. The quiet hum of the restaurant continued, but Emma's world had narrowed to the single point in front of her: Thomas, the envelope, and Lily's uncertain gaze. Emma's hand tightened around the edge of the table as the reality of her actions settled in. She had done what she needed to do, but still, there was a lingering hesitation. She had prepared herself for this moment, but it was different now. The tension in the air shifted when the door of the restaurant creaked open. A figure stepped in, silhouetted against the light pouring in from the street. Emma's heart skipped a beat as she turned. The figure moved quickly through the door, her dark hair fluttering slightly as she hurried toward the booth. It was Lily's mother, Sarah. Her eyes locked on Emma, filled with disbelief and confusion. Sarah's breath caught in her chest as she looked at her daughter, sitting there between Emma and Thomas, holding a small, crumpled coloring book. The space between them stretched, charged with unspoken words. Sarah's face softened, and she stepped forward without hesitation. Emma stood, her chest tightening as she saw the emotion surge in Sarah's eyes. Then, before Emma could take another breath, Sarah was there, wrapping her arms tightly around her, pulling her into an embrace. The force of it hit Emma like a wave, and for the first time, her shoulders trembled. The vulnerability she had carefully controlled, the plan she had set in motion, seemed to unravel in that instant. Sarah's voice broke as she whispered, "I never thought I'd see this day." "Thank you." Emma closed her eyes, her body shaking with the weight of the release, of finally feeling the forgiveness that had been so hard to reach. She didn't say anything at first, just allowed herself to be held. The moment stretched out, the quiet, overwhelming sound of Sarah's steady breath against her ear, the weight of years finally lifting. Then Sarah pulled back slightly, looking at Emma with tears in her eyes. "You've always been there for her," Sarah said, her voice trembling. Emma swallowed hard, the lump in her throat too thick to speak. She nodded, her voice barely audible. "I just wanted to protect her, Sarah." Sarah's hand cupped Emma's face gently, and she smiled, the years of distance and pain evaporating in that one simple act of forgiveness. "I know," she said. "And you did. You always did." Emma let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, the floodgates of relief opening as Sarah's hands, trembling slightly, clasped her shoulders, steadying her. The years of separation, the tension, the guilt, the weight of every decision, suddenly seemed so small in the face of this. Lily, still sitting in the booth, watched her mother's, her wide eyes moving. from Sarah's face to Emma's. Emma turned to her, and in that moment, something shifted. The final piece of the puzzle had clicked into place. The fear, the uncertainty of the past, faded. Emma walked over to Lily and crouched down to her level, brushing a strand of hair from the girl's face. "Sweetheart," Emma said, her voice softer than it had ever been. "You're safe now." Sarah stood behind Emma, her hand resting gently on her shoulder, and together they watched as Lily finally smiled, her face lighting up with relief. The weight of the world lifted from her small shoulders. "I know," Lily whispered, her voice a soft echo of the peace that had settled in the room. Emma nodded, her chest rising and falling with the breath of a woman who had carried too much for too long, but had finally found her way back. It wasn't just forgiveness. It was homecoming. And for the first time in a long time, Emma allowed herself to believe in the possibility of healing. The moment hung in the air, tender, quiet, and powerful. Sarah stepped forward again, taking Emma's hand in hers. "Let's move forward," she said softly. Emma looked up at her, meeting her gaze, feeling the weight of her past shift, and nodded slowly. Together, they would move forward. And as they stood there, side by side, the future felt full of promise, each step bringing them closer to the life they had fought for. Emma's eyes lingered on Lily, and for the first time in years, she felt like she had finally given her the home she had always dreamed of.